The greatest mistake you can make is believing you already know who deserves your respect. On most evenings, the streets surrounding the Franklin Federal Courthouse settled into an orderly rhythm as attorneys hurried toward parking garages. Courthouse employees wrapped up another day, and construction crews loaded their final tools before heading home. Rain had swept through downtown less than an hour earlier, leaving the pavement glistening beneath rows of amber streetlights that reflected across the wet asphalt like scattered pieces of glass. Commuters moved patiently through the intersection while courthouse security officers watched the steady flow of traffic entering and leaving the government complex. Nothing about the evening suggested that within minutes, one routine traffic stop would quietly begin changing the lives of everyone involved. Peter Ellison guided his aging white pickup truck toward a red light less than 2 blocks from the courthouse. The truck carried the ordinary signs of a long workday. A reflective safety vest rested on the passenger seat beside a worn hard hat, a pair of heavy work gloves, and a large insulated water bottle that had seen better days. Peter himself looked exactly like thousands of construction supervisors finishing another shift across America. At 46 years old, Peter was a tall, broad-shouldered black man whose muscular frame had been shaped by decades of physically demanding work rather than a fitness magazine. He wore faded work jeans, durable boots, and a faded gray work shirt beneath an unzipped canvas jacket that had become damp from the evening rain. His hands bore the calluses of years of physical work, while his calm eyes revealed someone accustomed to solving problems without raising his voice. Few people passing beside his truck would have given him a second glance. The lack of ceremony was intentional, but the traffic stop was not. Earlier that afternoon, Peter had volunteered at a renovation project connected to one of the community legal outreach centers he supported, helping staff inspect accessibility improvements before meeting privately with local residents. He had declined any ceremony, media coverage, or official introduction and had never bothered to change out of the work clothes provided at the site. He believed that understanding everyday experiences required walking through ordinary doors instead of reserved entrances. Only a handful of trusted judicial staff members even knew where he had been that day. Across the intersection, Officer Jackson Cole observed traffic from his marked patrol vehicle. At 39, Jackson maintained the athletic build of someone who rarely missed a workout. His Navy patrol uniform fit neatly across his shoulders, his equipment belt was perfectly organized, and his polished boots reflected years of disciplined routine. Fellow officers respected his confidence and willingness to act quickly, but several supervisors had privately noted a troubling pattern. During stops involving black male drivers, Jackson was more likely to interpret ordinary nervousness as suspicious behavior and calm confidence as calculated defiance. No formal finding had ever been made against him, yet his reports repeatedly showed that he trusted his first impression long after the available facts should have caused him to reconsider it. As the traffic light changed, Peter steered around a shallow puddle left by the storm, and his left tires briefly touched the lane divider before he corrected the truck's position. The movement gave Jackson a narrow but legitimate reason to initiate a traffic stop, though nothing about it suggested impairment, danger, or criminal activity. It was a small movement that many officers might have ignored. Yet after seeing an older pickup driven by a large black man in work clothes near the federal courthouse, Jackson allowed several unrelated details to merge into a suspicion that the driving itself did not justify. Within seconds, he activated his emergency lights. Blue reflections rippled across the wet pavement as Peter immediately signaled, slowed carefully, and pulled into a legal curbside space without hesitation. He turned off the engine, lowered his driver's side window, and placed both hands comfortably on the steering wheel before the officer even stepped out of the cruiser. Nearby pedestrians slowed. Almost instinctively, curious but not alarmed. Jackson approached with measured confidence, studying Peter before speaking. Peter greeted him politely with a calm, steady voice that carried neither irritation nor fear. Jackson requested his driver's license and registration. Peter acknowledged the request, explained that his registration was stored inside the center console, and asked permission before reaching for it. Every movement remained deliberate, respectful, and completely cooperative. Jackson accepted the documents, glanced over them briefly, then looked back toward Peter with an expression that suggested he had already decided there was more to uncover. Peter noticed the look but remained composed. He had seen assumptions before. He also knew that challenging them rarely began with louder words. As Jackson walked back toward his patrol vehicle to begin checking the information, a black government sedan rolled slowly around the corner near the courthouse entrance. It did not activate emergency lights. It did not sound a siren. But when one sharply dressed passenger inside spotted Peter's pickup, his expression changed instantly, and he reached for a secure phone with unmistakable urgency. Officer Jackson Cole sat inside his patrol vehicle while rainwater slid slowly across the windshield, illuminating the computer screen with alternating flashes of blue emergency lights and passing headlights. He entered Peter Ellison's driver's license information exactly as procedure required, waiting for the database to return registration records, license status, and vehicle ownership. Everything initially appeared ordinary. The license was valid. The truck was properly registered. There were no outstanding warrants, no alerts requiring immediate action, and no indication that Peter posed any threat. Jackson frowned slightly. Nothing in the records justified extending the stop, yet he felt disappointed rather than reassured. Without recognizing it, he had begun treating the absence of evidence as proof that Peter was simply hiding something more carefully. Instead, the records described an ordinary citizen with a clean driving history. He looked back through the windshield toward Peter, who remained seated with both hands resting comfortably on the steering wheel, gazing forward without impatience or visible frustration. Most drivers became restless after several minutes. Peter simply waited. Across the street, the black government sedan slowed almost to a stop before continuing toward a restricted courthouse entrance. Inside the vehicle, Elaine Porter, the United States Marshal Service official coordinating security for that evening's judicial conference, lowered her phone after speaking quietly with another official. She had recognized Peter immediately despite his work clothes. There had been no public schedule for his community visits, and very few people even knew he had chosen to travel without the usual official escort. She instructed the driver to slow near the secured entrance while she requested immediate confirmation that Peter had not already entered through another access point. When the answer returned that he had not, she directed nearby judicial security personnel to approach the traffic stop without creating unnecessary public attention. The answer returned within seconds. No, he had not arrived. Elaine immediately realized the pickup truck she had just passed could not be ignored. At the same moment, Jackson stepped back toward Peter's window carrying the driver's license and registration. His expression remained controlled but noticeably skeptical. He asked Peter where he was coming from and where he was headed. Then, despite having no evidence connecting Peter to any courthouse incident, he asked why a man dressed for construction work was driving near the federal courthouse after normal business hours. Peter answered without hesitation. He explained that he had spent the afternoon visiting several community organizations before heading toward a scheduled meeting downtown. His tone remained steady and respectful. Jackson listened but seemed unconvinced. He asked another series of questions, each one slightly more probing than the last. Peter answered each one with the same calm consistency. When Peter asked whether the initial traffic concern had already been resolved, Jackson's tone hardened. He told Peter not to decide when the questioning was finished. The words were not openly racial, but the body camera later showed that Jackson had responded far more casually when white drivers asked the same question during comparable stops. A delivery driver waiting at the nearby traffic light glanced toward the scene before continuing on his route. Two courthouse employees exiting the parking garage slowed their pace, quietly observing from a respectful distance without interfering. Nothing about the encounter appeared dramatic, yet an unusual tension settled over the sidewalk because Peter never displayed the nervousness Jackson seemed to expect. Then something unexpected happened. Jackson's portable radio crackled with a brief transmission from dispatch mentioning that judicial security personnel were attempting to locate an important courthouse official whose arrival had been delayed. The message was incomplete, partially obscured by routine radio traffic, and Jackson barely acknowledged it before focusing back on Peter. He believed the unrelated dispatch could wait. That small decision would soon matter far more than he realized. Several blocks away, Elaine Porter received confirmation that Peter's encrypted government phone had not connected to the courthouse security network as scheduled. The device remained inside a locked compartment beneath the rear seat, where Peter had stored it after its battery dropped into emergency power mode during his community visits. She requested nearby judicial protection officers to quietly determine whether he required assistance, but emphasized that no one was to create unnecessary public attention. Back beside the pickup, Jackson asked Peter whether he carried any additional identification. Peter replied that he did, but politely added that if further verification became necessary, the appropriate government office could easily confirm his identity through established procedures. Jackson interpreted the response as evasive rather than procedural. Peter noticed the misunderstanding but chose not to argue. Experience had taught him that calm explanations often carried greater weight than emotional reactions, even when they were not immediately accepted. As Jackson considered his next step, another unmarked government vehicle entered the block at a careful speed. Unlike ordinary traffic, it did not continue through the intersection. Instead, it pulled quietly to the curb nearly 50 feet behind the patrol car, and two professionally dressed officials stepped out, their eyes fixed not on the officer, but on the man sitting calmly inside the weathered pickup truck. The two officials closed their vehicle doors with quiet precision, neither rushing nor drawing unnecessary attention. Their dark business attire blended naturally with the courthouse environment, yet there was something unmistakably disciplined about the way they surveyed the scene. One briefly spoke into a concealed communication device, while the other kept his eyes fixed on Peter Ellison's pickup truck. They did not interrupt. They simply observed. Officer Jackson Cole noticed them almost immediately. Years of patrol work had trained him to recognize government personnel, but from his perspective they appeared to be routine federal employees with no immediate connection to the traffic stop. He returned his attention to Peter, convinced that maintaining control of the encounter remained his responsibility. Jackson asked Peter to step out of the truck so they could continue their conversation more comfortably beside the vehicle. Peter complied without hesitation. He opened the door slowly, stepped onto the rain-darkened pavement, and closed the truck carefully behind him. Standing a little over 6 feet tall with the broad frame of a man accustomed to physical labor, Peter remained completely relaxed, keeping his hands visible and making no movement that could reasonably be interpreted as threatening. His canvas jacket hung open over the faded gray work shirt he had worn throughout the day, and small droplets of rain still clung to the shoulders of the fabric. He kept his hands visible, maintaining the same calm posture that had defined every moment since the emergency lights first appeared behind him. Jackson studied Peter carefully. There was something unusual about his composure. Most people became defensive after repeated questioning. Others attempted to explain themselves in increasingly emotional ways. Peter did neither. His steady eye contact and measured answers projected quiet confidence rather than resistance. That confidence only deepened Jackson's suspicion because he interpreted calmness as calculated self-assurance instead of simple self-control. A few yards away, courthouse employees paused beneath the building's covered entrance, pretending to check their phones while discreetly watching the interaction unfold. Inside the courthouse, an entirely separate conversation was beginning. The administrative office responsible for coordinating the evening judicial conference had quietly informed senior staff that the chief judge had not arrived. At first, no one expressed concern. His schedule occasionally changed during community visits. However, when repeated secure calls remained unanswered, Judicial Security Director Elaine Porter requested that nearby protection officers confirm his location through established protocols. The request remained confidential, known only to a handful of personnel. No public announcement was made. No alarms sounded. Yet within minutes, several experienced professionals were moving with deliberate purpose toward the courthouse perimeter. Outside, Jackson continued asking Peter about his schedule. Peter explained that he had visited several legal aid organizations earlier in the afternoon because he believed first-hand observation often revealed details that official reports overlooked. Jackson paused. That answer sounded oddly specific for someone who appeared to have spent the day supervising construction work. Before he could ask another question, his patrol radio crackled once more. Dispatch advised that judicial security units had entered the immediate area searching for an unidentified individual connected to courthouse operations. The transmission ended before additional details could be provided. Jackson glanced briefly toward the unmarked government vehicle, but dismissed the message as unrelated. He believed coincidence explained the timing. 50 feet away, One of the suited officials quietly received a photograph through his secure device. He compared the image to the man standing beside the pickup truck, then looked toward his partner with a subtle nod that required no words. They had found exactly who they were searching for. Still, they waited. Their instructions were clear. They were not to interfere unless circumstances required intervention. Jackson requested one final piece of identification beyond the driver's license already verified by dispatch. Peter looked at him with the same composed expression he had maintained all evening. In a courteous voice, he explained that the additional credential was secured inside the truck and contained information not intended for ordinary traffic identification. He explained that he would retrieve it if Jackson formally required it, but that the issuing office could confirm the credential more safely through established channels. But if proper verification became necessary, the appropriate office could confirm everything within minutes. Jackson interpreted the statement as another attempt to avoid direct answers. He took one slow step closer, preparing to make a decision that he believed demonstrated sound judgment. At that exact moment, the lead official from the unmarked vehicle began walking toward them, removing a small leather credential wallet from inside his suit jacket. The suited official approached at an unhurried pace, stopping several feet away before speaking. His voice remained calm, professional, and measured. "Good evening, officer. Good evening, officer. I am a senior inspector with the United States Marshals Service Judicial Security Division. May I ask what is taking place here? May I ask what is taking place here?" Jackson Cole turned toward him with practiced confidence. He acknowledged the credential wallet that had just been presented but did not step aside. Instead, he briefly explained that he had initiated a lawful traffic stop and was conducting a routine investigation. The official listened without interruption, offering only a slight nod before shifting his attention toward Peter Ellison. Their eyes met for only a moment, yet the exchange carried an unmistakable familiarity. Jackson noticed it immediately. He assumed Peter and the official must have known one another professionally, but he still believed the encounter remained well within ordinary procedure. Peter did not speak first. He simply returned the respectful nod and waited. The official then addressed Jackson once again, politely asking whether the driver's identity had already been verified through standard state databases. Jackson answered that the driver's license had been confirmed as valid, but explained that several responses had raised additional questions requiring further clarification. The official thanked him for the explanation without expressing agreement or disagreement. Around them, the sidewalk grew noticeably quieter. A courthouse maintenance employee paused beside a service entrance while pretending to organize equipment inside a utility cart. Two attorneys standing beneath the courthouse awning lowered their conversation, their attention drifting naturally toward the unusual gathering. Even passing vehicles appeared to slow slightly as drivers noticed several government officials standing beside a marked patrol car. The atmosphere remained peaceful, yet everyone sensed that something uncommon was unfolding. Inside the courthouse, Judicial Security Director Elaine Porter received another secure update. The officers she had dispatched had successfully located the individual they were searching for. She instructed them to avoid unnecessary public attention while she personally made her way toward the entrance. Her only request was simple: no assumptions, no interruptions. Allow established procedures to unfold. Back outside, the official standing beside Jackson requested permission to make a brief secure verification call before any additional decisions were made. Jackson hesitated. Department policy encouraged cooperation with legitimate federal agencies, yet he remained convinced that delaying his own investigation could allow important facts to be overlooked. After a brief pause, he agreed that the call could be made while he retained responsibility for the stop. The official stepped a short distance away and quietly spoke into an encrypted phone. His words were barely audible, but one sentence reached Jackson's ears. "Please confirm the arrival status of the chief judge." Jackson looked toward Peter almost immediately. The statement seemed strangely unrelated. Peter's expression did not change. He remained composed, standing comfortably beside his truck with his hands visible, neither attempting to leave nor interrupting the conversation. Jackson concluded that the official must be handling an entirely separate assignment involving courthouse operations. Moments later, the official ended the call. His professional expression softened almost imperceptibly before he returned to the group. "Thank you for your patience, he said politely. Verification is in progress. Jackson nodded, believing the situation remained under control. He had no reason to think the phone call involved the man standing directly in front of him. Then another black government sedan rolled quietly to the curb. This one carried no visible agency markings, yet the moment it stopped, both suited officials instinctively straightened their posture. The rear passenger door opened, and Judicial Security Director Elaine Porter stepped onto the rain-darkened sidewalk. She looked first toward Peter, then toward Jackson, and finally toward the small gathering of silent observers. Without raising her voice or displaying the slightest urgency, she walked directly toward Peter and said words that instantly changed the atmosphere around everyone standing there. "Good evening, Chief Judge. We have been looking for you." For a moment, the sounds of downtown seemed to disappear beneath the steady patter of rain. Officer Jackson Cole looked from Elaine Porter to Peter Ellison, waiting for someone to explain what he believed had to be a misunderstanding. Peter remained exactly as he had throughout the entire encounter, standing quietly beside his weathered pickup truck with the same calm expression that had never once given way to frustration. Elaine approached him with unmistakable respect. "Chief Judge, the conference has been waiting for your arrival. We became concerned when we could not confirm your location." Peter offered a small apologetic smile. "I am sorry for the delay. It appears the evening took an unexpected turn." Jackson blinked several times as his mind attempted to reconcile the image before him with the assumptions he had made only minutes earlier. The man wearing faded work clothes, worn boots, and a gray tank top did not resemble the public image he had unconsciously associated with one of the most senior positions in the federal judiciary. Without realizing it, Jackson had confused appearance with identity long before he ever asked his first question. Maintaining his professionalism, he cleared his throat and addressed Elaine. "Ma'am, I will need official confirmation before I make any changes to this investigation." There was no hostility in his voice, only uncertainty. Elaine nodded immediately. "That is entirely appropriate, officer." She removed a secure identification folder from her leather portfolio and presented official judicial credentials identifying Peter Ellison as the Chief Judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the Franklin Circuit. Jackson accepted the documents carefully. Every page carried the security features he had been trained to recognize. The identification numbers, authorization seals, and verification contacts all appeared authentic. Still, department policy required independent confirmation whenever extraordinary circumstances arose. Jackson requested dispatch to contact the designated Federal Verification Office using established channels rather than relying solely upon physical credentials. Peter quietly observed the exchange without interruption. His expression revealed neither satisfaction nor resentment. He simply waited for the process to work exactly as it had been designed. Several minutes passed. During that time, the courthouse entrance remained unusually still. Employees who had originally intended to leave after work now lingered discreetly inside the lobby windows, careful not to interfere while quietly watching events unfold outside. Jackson's portable radio finally came to life. Dispatch spoke in an unusually measured tone. "Officer Cole, federal judicial authorities have confirmed the identity presented at your location. Verification is complete." The brief transmission lasted only seconds, yet its meaning settled heavily over the sidewalk. Jackson lowered the radio slowly. Everything he had believed about the stop had changed. He looked toward Peter again, searching for signs of anger that never appeared. Instead, Peter simply met his eyes with the same composed dignity that had remained constant since the flashing lights first appeared behind his truck. Jackson quietly returned the driver's license and registration. "Sir," he began carefully, "I appreciate your patience throughout this process." Peter accepted the documents with a polite nod. "Thank you, officer. I appreciate your commitment to verification. Procedures exist for a reason." Those words surprised everyone standing nearby. They contained no accusation, no sarcasm, and no attempt to embarrass anyone. Elaine Porter glanced toward Peter, recognizing exactly what he was doing. He was allowing professionalism to remain stronger than emotion. Yet the evening was not finished. Peter calmly turned toward Elaine before speaking again. "Before we leave, I would like one request honored." Jackson looked up immediately. Elaine nodded. "Of course, Chief Judge." Peter's voice remained steady. Please ensure that every body camera recording, dispatch recording, and written report connected to tonight's encounter is preserved exactly as it exists. Nothing should be removed, summarized, or edited. The complete record deserves to speak for itself. Elaine answered without hesitation. It will be done. Jackson felt a quiet uneasiness settle over him. Peter had not asked for punishment. He had not demanded discipline. He had only requested that the truth remain intact. Somehow, that simple request carried more weight than any immediate accusation could have. And as the first official preservation notices quietly began moving through the judicial security network, Jackson realized this ordinary traffic stop had only just begun its most important chapter. Ignoring status or wealth, every fair investigation begins with one simple question: what actually happened? That question echoed through a quiet conference room inside the courthouse the following morning as an independent review team gathered every available record connected to the previous evening's traffic stop. No conclusions had been reached. No one had been blamed. The purpose of the review was not to protect reputations or create headlines. It was to understand the complete sequence of events exactly as they had occurred. Peter Ellison arrived early, wearing a tailored navy suit instead of the work clothes he had worn the night before. Around the long conference table sat judicial administrators, legal ethics advisors, and representatives responsible for maintaining institutional accountability. Peter greeted each person warmly before taking his seat. He made one request before the meeting officially began. Please remember that this review is about improving public confidence in the justice system. It is not about elevating me above any other citizen. Every person in the room understood the significance of those words. At police headquarters across town, Officer Jackson Cole sat alone in a small interview room preparing his written statement. The confidence that had once guided every decision during the stop had given way to careful reflection. He replayed the encounter repeatedly in his mind, remembering Peter's calm voice, his respectful answers, and the patience he had shown even when additional questions continued. Jackson realized that he had spent more time trying to confirm his first impression than testing whether that impression might be wrong. That realization was uncomfortable because it came entirely from his own memory rather than someone else's criticism. Before Jackson completed his report, an internal affairs investigator entered the room with a simple request. Every sentence should describe observable facts rather than assumptions. Jackson quietly nodded and began rewriting portions of his statement with greater precision. Meanwhile, technicians inside the evidence unit synchronized body camera recordings, patrol vehicle video, dispatch communications, and courthouse security footage into one continuous timeline. The reviewers wanted every second preserved exactly as it had happened. The reviewers also compared the encounter with several routine stops Jackson had conducted during the previous month. In 2 recordings involving white drivers whose vehicles had briefly crossed lane markers, Jackson had verified their documents, issued verbal warnings, and ended the encounters within minutes. The comparison did not prove what Jackson had consciously intended, but it raised a necessary question about why Peter's equally minor movement had led to prolonged questioning after every record returned clean. Halfway through organizing the evidence, one analyst noticed something unusual. Nearly 7 minutes before Judicial Security Director Elaine Porter arrived, dispatch had transmitted a brief message advising nearby officers that judicial security personnel were searching for a delayed courthouse official. The message had been partially interrupted by routine radio traffic, but it remained audible on the recording. The analyst marked the timestamp without offering any interpretation. That small discovery immediately became part of the official timeline. Later that afternoon, Peter personally reviewed the opening summary prepared for the investigation. One paragraph described the encounter as an act of deliberate racial discrimination before the panel had completed its review. Peter asked that the wording remain provisional. Describe what the recordings show first, he said. Then let the findings name what happened. His quiet correction surprised several members of the review panel because it reflected the same principle he had defended throughout his judicial career. Facts should lead conclusions, not the other way around. As the day drew to a close, Jackson submitted his finalized statement and expected to be called before the review panel within days. Instead, his supervisor informed him that the investigators intended to examine the recordings before interviewing anyone involved. Jackson accepted the decision without objection. He still believed the cameras would show that he had followed procedure, not yet realizing that procedure could appear neutral on paper while being applied differently in practice. Across the courthouse, the lead evidence analyst pressed play on the synchronized recordings, expecting an ordinary review of a routine traffic stop that had become extraordinary only because of one unexpected identity. Less than 2 minutes into the footage, however, the analyst suddenly paused the video, leaned closer to the screen, and quietly asked another reviewer to look at something no one had mentioned in a single report. The room fell silent as the lead evidence analyst replayed the same 30-second segment for everyone seated around the review table. Nothing dramatic appeared on the screen at first. Officer Jackson Cole approached the pickup truck exactly as described in his report. Peter Ellison remained seated with both hands visible on the steering wheel. Their opening conversation matched every written statement almost perfectly. Then the analyst paused the recording and enlarged a small section near the bottom corner of the frame. A courthouse security officer, standing more than 70 feet away, could be seen speaking into a portable radio while pointing briefly toward Peter's truck. Moments later, dispatch transmitted the partially interrupted message that judicial security personnel were searching for a delayed courthouse official. The timing aligned almost exactly. What caught the review panel's attention was not the transmission itself, but Jackson's reaction. He had acknowledged the radio traffic for less than a second before returning his attention to the stop. The recording suggested he heard the message, but the overlapping communications made it impossible to determine how much information actually reached him. No one at the table rushed to judgment. Instead, the panel carefully documented the possibility that incomplete communication may have influenced the officer's decisions. Peter watched quietly without interrupting. When the analyst asked whether he wished to comment, Peter shook his head. "Not yet," he replied. "The evidence deserves to finish speaking before any of us do." His answer reinforced the careful tone that had guided the review from the beginning. Across town, Jackson received notice that he would appear before the independent panel the following morning. He spent the evening rereading his report, paying particular attention to the dispatch timeline. For the first time, he remembered hearing fragments of a transmission about judicial security, but he had dismissed it because routine radio traffic often included information unrelated to his own assignment. He wondered whether he should have requested clarification before continuing the stop. The question stayed with him long after he left the station. Early the next morning, the review resumed. Audio specialists synchronized every available communication channel with the body camera recordings to eliminate any uncertainty about timing. The revised sequence confirmed that the dispatch message had indeed been partially blocked by another transmission. Several key words became difficult to understand. That discovery did not excuse poor judgment, but neither did it support the assumption that Jackson knowingly ignored information identifying Peter. The distinction mattered because the purpose of the investigation was accuracy rather than speculation. Midway through the session, another reviewer raised an entirely different observation. Throughout the encounter, Peter had multiple lawful opportunities to reveal his official position directly. Instead, he repeatedly suggested that proper government channels verify his identity. The panel asked him why. Peter answered without hesitation. "If ordinary citizens are expected to rely on established procedures, then I should be willing to rely on those same procedures myself. My title should never replace the process." Several members of the panel quietly exchanged thoughtful glances. His explanation transformed the evening from an isolated traffic stop into an unexpected test of institutional reliability. As the hearing concluded for the day, the chairperson informed everyone that Officer Cole would appear next to answer questions after the panel completed one final review of the recordings. The evidence analyst agreed, but requested permission to examine the opening minute one last time using enhanced audio software. The request seemed routine until a faint voice, previously buried beneath overlapping radio traffic, became just clear enough to recognize. The enhanced recording would soon clarify what Jackson had heard, but a separate comparison of his previous traffic stops was beginning to reveal a pattern far more important than the identity he had failed to recognize. The enhanced audio recording revealed something no one had anticipated. Just seconds after the dispatch transmission became partially obscured by overlapping radio traffic, a courthouse security officer could be heard quietly saying into his radio, "Please notify judicial security that the delayed official may be near the west entrance." The statement never mentioned a name. It never identified Peter Ellison. Most importantly, the evidence showed that Officer Jackson Cole had already turned his attention back toward Peter, while another transmission briefly covered the remaining words. The independent panel carefully reviewed the sequence several times before reaching the same conclusion. Jackson had not deliberately ignored information identifying the chief judge because that identifying information had never actually reached him in a complete and understandable form. At the same time, the review concluded that implicit racial bias had influenced Jackson's decision-making, causing him to interpret a black driver's ordinary behavior as suspicious and to continue escalating the encounter after the lawful purpose of the traffic stop had been resolved. Both findings existed together without contradiction. Facts rarely fit into simple categories. Later that afternoon, Jackson entered the hearing room and answered every question directly. He acknowledged that he had focused too heavily on confirming his first impression instead of allowing new information to reshape it. He admitted that Peter's race, physical size, older pickup truck, and work clothes had combined inside his mind into a picture of danger that the actual evidence never supported. He acknowledged that he had interpreted confidence differently when it came from a black man and had continued searching for wrongdoing after the lawful purpose of the stop had effectively ended. No one interrupted him. No one attempted to complete his sentences. When he finished speaking, the chairperson thanked him for his honesty before inviting Peter to offer any final remarks. Peter rose slowly from his chair and looked around the room before speaking. "Every person here carries public responsibility," he said calmly. "Courts, police officers, judges, and citizens all depend upon procedures that are stronger than individual assumptions. Yesterday, those procedures ultimately worked because verification replaced speculation. There were areas that deserve improvement, but improvement begins with truth rather than embarrassment." The room remained silent. Peter then surprised everyone once again. He formally requested that no punishment be increased merely because the driver happened to be a chief judge. At the same time, he made clear that his title should not reduce the department's responsibility to address the racial disparity identified in the evidence. He encouraged the department to impose the same corrective measures it should have imposed if the driver had been any other black citizen, and to incorporate the incident into future training on procedural fairness, communication, and racial bias. The review panel unanimously agreed. Jackson was placed into an advanced professional development program and temporarily reassigned while completing additional instruction focused on decision-making, constitutional policing, and impartial public interaction. Months passed. Autumn gradually gave way to winter before the police academy welcomed its newest class of recruits. Jackson stood before them wearing the same uniform, but his perspective had changed. Instead of presenting himself as someone who had all the answers, he openly described the importance of questioning first impressions and allowing evidence to guide every decision. He never mentioned personal embarrassment. He spoke instead about responsibility. Near the back of the auditorium sat Peter, attending quietly without ceremony or public recognition. After the presentation ended, Jackson approached him. For a brief moment, neither man spoke. Then Jackson extended his hand. "Thank you for allowing the process to teach me instead of allowing pride to stop it." Peter accepted the handshake with a warm smile. The law serves people best when every one of us remains willing to learn. As they walked towards separate exits beneath the soft afternoon sunlight, there were no reporters waiting outside, no dramatic speeches, and no celebration. Only two public servants leaving the same building with a deeper understanding of what justice truly asks from those entrusted to protect it. Closing reflection. Perhaps the moments that shape our character are not always the loudest ones. Sometimes they arrive quietly, hidden inside ordinary conversations, unexpected encounters, or assumptions that go unnoticed until someone gently holds them up to the light. This story reminds us that fairness often depends less on titles than on the willingness to slow down, verify, and truly see the person standing in front of us. There are times when humility accomplishes far more than victory, and when accountability becomes meaningful because it creates room for growth instead of resentment. Long after the details of a single day begin to fade, The choices people make in response to difficult moments often become the part that stays with us the longest. If you found yourself in Officer Cole's position, what decision do you believe would have been the hardest to make? What part of Peter's response stayed with you the most? And how might you have handled the same situation if you had been there?